Poštovani, najnapred sakam da izrazam.
Dear all, I would like to express exceptional gratitude to being part of this grandeur scientific gathering and to wish all of you successful work, taking into account the fact that this is the topic of the conference has Macedonia and Macedonians as in their focus. 100 years after the Treaty of Bucharest and the felt consequences, with my work, with my study, I would like to contribute towards the enlightenment of the activities around the Balkan Wars and the repercussions over the Bošniaks or the Bosnians. So my study talks about the direction in which activities should be directed, not only in Macedonia, but only with mutual understanding can this be achieved, and cooperation we can build a better future. The organization of this scientific conference, the best possible way it does that. And the UMD, I would like to congratulate and thank. As already said, with my research, in addition to the short recap of the military activities, the consequences of the Bosnians from the Balkan Wars, so I place my focus there on the Bosnians and their mass migration. What has been repeated, I just wanted to start earlier from the Berlin Congress, which is one of the prerequisites, that is the conclusions and the decisions are the probably one of the main causes for the Balkan Wars and the Bucharest Agreement. Unfavorable conclusions were not only for Macedonians but for the Bosnians and for the Vlachs and for all the others. And secondly, with the solutions and the decisions from the Berlin Congress, the new expanded borders of Serbia, Bulgaria and Greece were legalized as Montenegro, that actually carried out ethnic cleansing and persecution of the local population, which was not desirable for the governing, ruling management. So unfavorable conditions for the Bosnians, for the Macedonians, and the ethnic cleansing for the enhancement of the borders, and they contributed just to partial reconciliation or calming down of tensions. But in any case, new clashes were awaited and expected. The process that followed, due to the unfavorable decisions, the struggle of the Macedonian people for freedom and equality and independence has been intensified by the end of the 19th, the beginning of the 20th century by uprisings, the Ilidan uprising, the other reforms, as well as the Young Turkish Revolution. In Mirštek, the same year, certain definite steps have been identified in order to introduce reform in Macedonia, all in favor of improving the difficult state of affairs. However, the reforms were either slowly or they weren't implemented at all. One of the important things that appeared at the beginning of the 20th century was the appearance of the Young Turkish Revolution, which at the same time created an atmosphere of reconciliation among the Macedonian people and the other ethnicities. And it created some sort of trust and confidence that the forthcoming period will be the one of peace and tranquility and will provide the opportunity for creating the autonomous Macedonia within the democratic and decentralized Ottoman state. However, the Young Turks did not manage for a very short time to resolve the complex issues, and that was an additional dissatisfaction and an attempt for a military action. So if the Balkan was the gravest point, that is the one of turmoil and conflict, then Macedonia was the location within the Balkan that was the one of greatest turmoil and insecurities. The Balkan state intensively carried out propaganda and prepared the population for fight against the Ottoman authority. So the press, in Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece and Montenegro, and particularly in the summer before the start of the war, published numerous titles as regards the headings for the difficult position of the enslaved so-called peoples, the liberation of the enslaved brothers Christians, the liberation of the national ideals, the liberation of Macedonia, were the messages that at the beginning the Balkan allies masked their conquering ideals and aspirations towards Macedonia. So the Holy War, the liberation of the enslaved brother Christians, the national ideals, as I already mentioned, were quite widely propagated. The Ottoman state was not ready to enter a war. And at the next chart from the extract of the Carnegie Committee, you could see the aspirations as a result of which the Ottoman Empire thought that she won't get into an agreement with the rest of the Balkan states that wanted to grab Macedonia as the most significant part from an economic point of view, from the political point of view, from a strategic point of view, and so on. So this is the publication, the proclamation of war by Montenegro, and the other states followed. The war against the Ottoman Empire that was defeated in almost all significant battles and was required to ask for a peaceful resolution. There were also disagreements between the allies regarding the division of the prey that disturbed the feeble balance. After the Second Balkan War, actually the division of Macedonia started. The Treaty of Bucharest, which is a peace treaty, provisionally, actually caused the greatest injustice inflicted over the Macedonians and the Macedonian state, and not a single aggravating event in the history or the more modern history can be found that will reflect the consequences of the Treaty of Bucharest. Atrocities, violence, persecution of the people, erasing of settlements, and confusion in the lines of the Macedonian liberation movement. The consequences of the Balkan Wars and the atrocities of the population, you can see on the slide, they can be measured through the figures in terms of estimation of damages, military expenses, victims. So the destruction of the infrastructure, of the existing economic values. So Macedonia as a central important strategic province became a dependent province to multiple states, by the means of which the economic relations were destroyed and severed, and all the other consequences that followed. To me, what has left the greatest trauma was the psychological trauma, and that is why frequently we use the term genocide, because the psychological trauma and the suffering due to lost villages, lost relatives, lost family, lost identity. In the gravest situation, those that became aliens in their own country, but the more they differed from the new authority, their status was even worse. Through the implementation of the war crimes, not a single Balkan army was left aside, so they all performed war crimes. The atrocities could have been stopped only by an order from Athens, Belgrade, and Sofia, but not that it didn't come at all, but they were quite indifferent and even to some extent supported that. The only general appeal for humanity was published by the Macedonian Uprising Internal Organization, that is the Macedonian organization VMRO, but to no effect. When it comes to the Bosnians in these areas, but the rest of the Muslims, irrespective of their ethnic affiliation, they were the biggest losers since the establishment and the setup of the new states. The process of migration of the Bosnians were most intensive the part occupied by Serbia and Montenegro, above all Sanjak, Kosovo and Macedonia. So the percentage of the refugees differ. They're incomplete and burdened by various subjective interpretation, ideological interpretation, and so on. But there is a general picture that can be provided regarding the migration of the Bosnians and other Muslims. So the estimates include about 200,000 persons during the military actions, and after the wars around 200,000 persons more that migrated from Macedonia. All that was helped with the aggravated situation. So disease and famine and so on. So cholera took hundreds and hundreds of lives. So this is Ottoman statistics. Around 180,000 were migrated to the rest of the Ottoman state. Often it's misused the fact that those have been Albanians or Turks, and that is being, so we manipulate for personal or political propaganda or ideological gain. So we're talking about Muslims with different ethnicity, including the Bosnians, because the sources, irrespective of whether we're talking about British or Austro-Hungarian, talk about, among other things, that among other inhumane actions, they talk about the Bosnian Muhajiri, but those are the Bošniaks or the Bosnians. Now we're talking about clear Bosnians from the and the official figures from the Austrian consular representatives asking for them to go back to Bosnia to return, and around 5,000 to 100,000 persons. What is the official statistics in Bosnia and Herzegovina, back then in Austro-Hungary, is that about 4,000 people returned to Bosnia, but registered were only those that went through sea, through Thessaloniki. But through Kosovo and Sanjak, refugees or the ones that came back were not registered. I'm just briefly going to note here several of the places. Even there are a lot of locations in which Bosnians resided, but the majority of location after the Kumanovo battle, Bosnians disappear from the location linked to the infrastructure Kumanovo Skopje. In between the villages that had the majority of situated Bosnians were Kadino, Umindol, Mrševci, Bilimbegovo, Deljadovce. So they even left the tables filled with food. So they left them, just took their families with them and ran away. Also, Veles villages, Vladilovci, Jasenovo, in 1912. Even there is one sentence saying that a mother left a baby in a cradle in an empty home. After the brutal attacks, a lot of villages were left without any Bosnian population. Stipan Radović, and due to the atrocities and taking away the property, homes were vacated. So the Bosnian neighborhood was fully destroyed during the Second Balkan War in the clash with the Serbs. In Kratovo area, Kočani area, in Maleševia area. We have stated sources talking about huge terror inflicted, and the Bosnian settlement Piskaceva in Strumica and the Strumica area after the Balkan War. We don't have any records as to what happened with that villages near this region. So these are just some of the most important inhabited settlements in which Bosnians used to live after the wars were deprived of any Bosnian population. So the intensive migration during the Balkan Wars provided somewhat reconciliation and somewhat peace, but in the newly occurred situation, the majority of Bosnians were situated in the new settlements in Skopje, Mađar Malo, Bosnian Malo, those are neighborhoods in Hasanbegovo in Čento, and then in Kumanovo and Kumanovo region, in Štip, in Bitola, Pehčevo, Kočani, Gostivar. There are Bosnians, but in reduced numbers, and it's continually decreasing. And as a conclusion is that in the complex processes that preceded the establishment of the new state, the Bosnians tried to revive their medieval tradition, promoting the Bosnianhood as national ideology. However, not that only Bosnians were left aside from the processes and the changes in the state, but the nation were negated, and there were attempts for their assimilation and reduction of their number through various pressures and incitement of migration. Macedonian and Macedonians, just like Bosnians, were doomed only because they felt differently and they wanted to decide for themselves and wanting for their best, for them to decide and to build the states and the territory on which they lived forever. The consequences are felt even today, but we are not to be frustrated or discouraged. We need to be rational and united in resolving all of the unresolved issues and questions which we face today. Thank you.
Ви благодарам за излагањето на трудот.
Thank you for your presentation. All papers received were given to participants. Your paper was assigned to Stojan Nikolov to read, but he is not able to be present here to comment your paper, so thank you for your presentation, and if there are any questions, please. I think that the paper was very interesting. I'd like to ask whether Bošniaks are put in the ethnic category during the Balkan Wars. How do you separate them from the corpus of the Muslims in that period? Does the fate, did they displace moved as Bošniaks? Because in no census, neither British nor American, of all those present here, Bošniaks are not mentioned in nowhere. There is no category, ethnicity Bošniak. Do you suffer from the psychological complex of Muslims, and You say yourselves that they were not recognized by the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. Can we speak of ethnicity Bošniaks? Because there is no such thing. It doesn't exist in any documents. Muhadžini drew back, and Bošniaks are part of Muhadžins. About Macedonia, if we talk, greatest part of the sources, they are called Bošnjak Muhajiris, or they are named after the place where they come from. When it comes to the same, because it's the same people, when we say Bosna, Sanjak, whatever part, we have in Macedonia also call them as Bošnjaks, so they separate them from the rest. And when it comes to Macedonia, most usually they're named as Bošnjaks. The national consciousness and the formation of Bošnjak nation was formed far before. They were separated in the Ottoman Empire from Turks. They're separated as Bošnjaks. They have their own language, Bosnian language, their identity in Austro-Hungary. Also, they're defined as Bošnjaks. I think that this is, we can speak of ethnicity at that time, Bošnjaks. According to my research, no one, according to the separate division in the Ottoman territory, nobody can precisely say who was, what percent were Albanians, Macedonians. So these are Muslims with different, at that period, called Muslims. How I have some detailed numbers about this. We have in the State Archive of Macedonia, we see many places where Bošnjaks came to live, Bošnjaks before the Balkan Wars. These places, when they disappear, Bošnjaks, I used it as a, because we cannot get precise number how many they are. They were aware of themselves, so they were conscious of their identity. Among Muslims in Macedonia, I am Nejat Makhmedović, program coordinator of the School for Public Policies. I'd like to add up to the Bošnjaks existed before Balkan Wars. In the reports of Vasil Grnčov, 1900, in Hasabegovo village, there were 300 Muslims, which he identifies as Bošnjaks Muhammadans. In the villages that Ramčilović talks about, Macedonians call Muslims as Bošnjaks. In the Ljadrovce, Macedonians identify these Muslims as Bošnjaks. The same case in Bešnegovo, Maleševski region, Kavadarci region, and others. I'd like to add one more point. Besides all the bans of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the negation of the nation of Bošnjaks in Macedonia, one of the rare states where, besides all bans among Macedonians, Turks and Albanians, the term Bošnjaks was used. That process of reuse of the word Bošnjak had no divisions problems, as there were in other states where they lived.